You are listening to the RAMA Blueprints podcast, Roots of Rap, Part 3, The Last Harvest, Extra Commentary. In this extra commentary, we ask CARECEN SF's Director of Marketing and Communications, Juan Rivera, to interview both co-producers, Darren J. De Leon and myself, Socorro Gamboa, about our intentions and process in creating the Last Harvest episode. We hope this commentary can provide some clarity about the closure of the Real Alternatives program. Gracias.
My name is Juan Rivera. I am the Director of Marketing and Communications for CARECEN San Francisco, and I've had the honor and privilege to work closely with the producers of this podcast in order to help them promote it to the masses, while witnessing and appreciating all the incredible hard work they have done in order to complete each episode. The podcast has been a first of its kind oral history about a groundbreaking, influential, and many would say revolutionary community program named the Real Alternatives Program, which aimed to provide the young people who participated in it with empowerment, self-determination, and therefore provide a different answer to their future than what the school to prison pipeline was offering them. The Real Alternatives Program was born in San Francisco's Mission District, and it went on to influence many local city, state, and national programs, with many members of its ranks still working and currently being leaders in our communities today. With all that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce producer and host of the RAMA Blueprints podcast series, Socorro Gamboa, and producer and editor, Darren De Leon.
Hey,
Thank you.
thank you for that.
Welcome.
Thank you for that intro, Juan. Really appreciate that. Appreciate the work you're doing.
Well, it's great to be here with you guys. So this has been quite an honor for me. How long have we been working on this project?
Well, we started the idea during when COVID first broke out in early 2020, probably around March or April. And April, I think it was April. And we just wanted to kind of check in with folks. And we had always had this idea about telling the story of rap. Actually, Ray Balberon, when I first started working at rap as a teacher, on my first day, I didn't know who he was. He introduced himself, and I told him that I had just received my master's degree in English. And he says, great, you could write a history book about rap. I felt very honored that he asked me to do that. And then when I got together with the other teachers, being a new teacher, I got together with them and I said, hey, some man just asked me to write the history of rap. And Vicente Padilla, who was a teacher at the time, he goes, he asks everyone that. But when 2020 came through, we felt that there was a need that we had to start documenting the history of rap.
Yeah, if I could just add, I think Darren and I have a history. We worked at RAP together. I was the principal at the high school. And, we went through a series of events through the high school. I being the education director and working with several teachers and that experience, we carried it. And Darren's absolutely right. COVID came upon us, and right prior to COVID hitting, one of our former students passed away. And we took a road trip to San Francisco, and we talked about how come no one has really documented the story. I think people talk about it. And what happens is that we kind of go through this moments of epiphanies as we're having them, and coming back, we said we should check in with people. Darren's right. We had, I don't know how many Zoom meetings. And then as soon as we began to formalize it, going back to your question about how long we've been working with CARECEN, we thought about Mitch Salazar was still alive at that time. May he rest in peace. And we were looking for somewhere to house it. And in particular, we needed a nonprofit with 501c3 status because we were seeking funding to be able to sustain this work. And what happens is that we started looking at all the different organizations, and we basically met with different organizations. And I have to say, HOMEY was one of the first groups that said they gave us the first seed money. But in order to continue to collect money and continue to get funding for the program, we realized Larissa Dugue Cuadra was at CARECEN as the executive director. And she had grown up at RAP and been as part of RAP and a worker at RAP and an outreach worker and had been there, and it only made sense. So Mitch met with her, and thus came then, let's formalize the relationship. And Caresen became the fiscal sponsor. But it's not just fiscal sponsorship, it's also the belief in producing the podcast, helping us get support this work. And with that came you, Juan, you and the marketing, you and other folks, and currently Kevin, that's working with us. And so I want to say it's been about a 3-year relationship, and we've been on the road through the ups and the downs, but more the ups, right? And just kind of growing with the podcast and growing with the story. And it's for me, it's really humbling to see you and Kevin just so excited about the work, but also how we're learning together and the story that we're telling. And Carecen's role historically in the mission district, as well as just in the state and nationally, but just the relationship rap and Carecen goes way back.
Thank you for that. I think when I was young, when I was in college, I heard about rap, and I've met several people who told me that they worked at rap, and I know those folks, and they are still leaders in our community. I but there were many people who worked at rap, many people who participated in the program, and so the telling of the story really involves many, many, many people. Can you tell us about the process that you guys went through in order to put it together and then execute on that idea that you had?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to explain the term RAMA Blueprints.
Mhm.
I think that tells a lot. When we had decided that the podcast would be a proper format for telling this story, we also thought about the future of it too. So we created a rap audio media archive, this idea of it, and that spells Rama. And just by chance, Rama also means in Spanish means branch, and it's some of the opening syllables when you go into meditation, some of the chants and stuff that they have. So Rama it has this multiple use on it. Blueprints, on the other hand, is a direct reference on we're going to tell the story of the real alternative programs, RAP, and how they were able to take control of the neighborhood by developing youth development over a series of generations. RAP wasn't the only organization. There was many organizations that came about in the late 60s and early 70s. So what we want to do is just concentrate on RAP on it. So that's where we're giving you the blueprints, like how to build youth leadership over a period of generations in order to practice self-determination inside your neighborhood. And of course, Socorro had been employed at RAP not only as a school director, but other positions too. And I was there as a instructor. And so I wouldn't have been able to do this work unless I had someone who was deeply embedded into the RAP family over a period of time. My time at RAP was toward the end of before it closed, so it was a matter of years. But Socorro's experience at RAP had been there 4 or 5 times longer than I had, so she had those contacts, and I had the skill, having been a radio producer, not only at KUCR in Riverside, but also at KPFA in Berkeley. So figuring that the podcast would be the process that we would tell this story, I used my skills as an audio engineer and as an editor, and I worked in coordination with Socorro to think of what ideas and how we were going to tell the story and get in contact with the guest.
Yeah, I mean, after I wanna say maybe 6 rap family Zoom recordings, we decided let's start there. Let's start from the conversation when we talk about the process. So, what Darren said earlier, COVID had hit, things were going on, and a couple of people had passed away that we knew. And I kept saying to Darren, "Look, we gotta document this." And, I'm glad you explained that, Darren, about Rama, because it is an archive that we wanna leave the community. And I think that once we started having the first rap meeting, I just reached out. I wrote what Alfredo Bojorquez calls my manifesto. And I wrote this really passionate, a lot of amor, email to people and said, "This is what I'm feeling. This is what we're feeling. This is what the whole world is feeling." But in this little microcosm, this little mission district, in comparison to the whole world, there are a lot of people that really work from the heart, did what is called the heart work. And so let's just start talking. Let's connect. And so Darren orchestrated the Zoom calls, engineered them. I think we went from having 10 people to 20 people to people calling and saying, I want to be part of those Zoom meetings. I'm part of the RAP familia. I worked at RAP in 1969. I worked at RAP in 1980. You didn't work at RAP. I mean, you name it. It was the whole gamut. And so we had conversations and we used to say, okay, they're only an hour, and they would go 2 hours. And we would just be in conversation. And I'm telling you, and I mean, Darren has all the recordings and deep conversations. And from that, then we said, okay, how do we begin to tell the story? So we went back as far back as 1969. And that's when we knew we had to interview those first humanitarians, those first activists, which were the people from EMUNYO. And so to track them down, and that's kind of the work, doing producing, what I've learned, and Darren has taught me a lot, that the producer, you act as a researcher at the same time. You got to get out there, and it's a lot of hustle. So we spent a lot of time getting phone numbers, and I think I felt like we had really come into our own. Really, I knew we were on track, sitting at Jim Queen's house with the first founders of EMUNYO. I think there was, I don't know, 9 of them, Darren, that showed up. I can't remember the total. And there we were, and I was like, and they were all mic'd up. Darren knows all that equipment, and they were like, whoa, this is like really official. I think people, when you think about it, people think like, well, do they really know what they're doing? Yeah, well, guess what? Darren has that experience. And so there we were sitting with people that were on that corner that were talking to Jim Queen in 1969. It was incredible. So from there, we began to realize, okay, this is the way we do it. We have the research and development time, preparing with the script, and a lot of it is just me, Darren directing me and giving me direction, but guiding the conversation and really looking deep into people's souls and giving them the platform to speak, because a lot of folks had never been documented of the work they had done. These people orchestrated the history. They got the ball rolling in the mission. And so most of the process is interviewing and getting people out, getting them to speak. People want to be heard. And the blueprint is there, the actual steps on how you do it, how you don't do it. And so I think when we talk about the process, it does involve a lot of research, a lot of conversation, a lot of tracking people down. And I think when we decide, like, where are we going with this? So we've been very methodical of telling the story. Okay, now we're here. Now we're there. And in the midst of the story, where we find ourselves now is what is called the last harvest, our last episode, as we find ourselves over this last 3 years that we deal with Mitchell diagnosed with cancer. Mitchell is meeting with us during this process, and he passes away. We were so humbled to have a lot of Mitchell's conversation that we documented. And in the midst of this too, Jean Royale passes away. These are people that are historical figures that contributed. And so we develop it, and we've been able to tell the story, I think, in the most honest and transparent way. I think this last piece is our episode that we felt we needed to get to the closure of the Real Alternatives program of RAP with transparency and truth, and at the same time with honesty and passion, because the people that did that work, and I say that in this last episode, I said, when the RAP closed, when people turned their back on RAP, they didn't turn their back on Socorro. They didn't turn their back on the people that worked there. Or Mitchell. They turned their back on RAP. And so it's interesting. It's been a journey for us. It's a journey. It's an incredible, intimate, self-revealing, lagrimas, laughter. It's been a really interesting walk that we've been on for almost 4 years.
I really enjoyed this last podcast, the last harvest. I think it's definitely one of your best. I know that it took you guys a long time to produce it because of so many intricacies and so many details. But I think it's a very sensitive matter. And I wanted to ask you why focus on Mitch Salazar at the end. I never met Mitch, but just through hearing the podcast, he is definitely someone I admire. To take helm of an organization when you're at 24 years of age is quite daunting. And he did not only excel in it, but he made it grow. But yet the program eventually closed, and I know that there was a lot of blame and so forth. But I really like how you guys framed it in the sense that yes, Mitch had his shortcomings, but also the program itself is the responsibility of the community as well as the city and board of directors of the organization. So I really would love for you guys to talk about those points and explain sort of like your approach to all the points I mentioned.
Well, we tried to tell the story in a timeline, and we kind of jumped back and forth a little bit. But in this particular one, we look at the state of rap in the mid 80s. That's because that's the time that Mitchell gets assigned the executive directorship. It was kind of like an unwritten policy among rap once it got established itself as a organization in 69 to always had at the helm of it to have young leaders. And there's a series of young leaders, and Mitch falls into it. He winds up being, I think, the youngest executive director that's appointed at the age of 24. But it's because he has shown tremendous skill as an organizer, doing dances inside the mission, and having a tremendous pool among the youth and also among people who want to be able to help sponsor a rap. So we open up with that. We had also told a little bit the story of Mitchell and how he grew up. He grew up really as a street hustler, and with working hard. And when I say hustler, I'm talking about someone who's hustling constantly to get stuff done. I'm not talking about hustling as far as like trying to get over on somebody, but hustling to get work done and to move an agenda forward. If it's parties and unfortunately in Mitch's case, there was some history of his drug dealing, but also some other incredible stories about him working as a youngster and putting work in front of everything like of his education. But we opened up the episode with a snapshot of all the programs that are happening at that time, and then Mitchell being brought into it at that point. At that point, he has been trained up, and he's been getting familiar with all the rap principles, and starts learning how you could develop a community based upon these little appointments of young folks in certain positions, are making connections between organizations that are doing similar type of work, but more have a similar mission rather than replicating services. So when we pick up there, Mitch has been finely tuned, not only as a community organizer, but as someone who could work on behalf of the community. And we see that he does. One of the most important things that happens at that point too in 84 is that the way that nonprofit organizations become funded starts to change, because there's a lot of reliance upon private monies and foundations. And now they're providing social services that is almost the responsibility of like a county or a city social services department. And so with that happening, the city starts to step up and change the way that programs are funded. And that's where we come in. And we start telling that story, and we start seeing that some foundations have stopped funding nonprofits, or they're looking for a better way to distribute the money. And that's where the city starts coming in. The city had been pressured into getting a lot of money to an organization like RAP just through community pressure or coming in during city council meetings or jamming up the mayor or so forth. But now they want to formalize it so they can like evenly distribute a lot of this money to the different agencies, which is something that RAP in its inception in 69 really pushes, because RAP is not only sitting inside the mission, but that RAP model then gets replicated throughout the whole city in every different neighborhood. And at one point in the early 70s, there's like maybe 7 or 8 different neighborhoods within San Francisco that are being represented by a youth council or a youth organization that's very similar to RAP. And because of all of that pressure is coming upon them, not only from the mission, but through all of these youth organizations throughout the whole city, the city doesn't want to play favors on just one organization or one neighborhood. Instead, they want to be able to create and fund them all equally. But also on the downside of it too, is that it also allows those who are funding those organizations to begin to start pitting each other against each other. But because a lot of these organizations were founded under the same principles, they stood in unity, they stood in solidarity with each other, and they didn't allow for that division to happen. And that's when we come in and we start seeing how that funding begins to change. For example, the Department of Children, Youth, and Family was an idea that Jim Queen and some of the younger folks and people who were involved with RAP had developed. And they wanted to have that type of, they want to institutionalize the funding for their organizations. And they felt that that'd be a great way to do it, to create this Department of Children, Youth, and Family. And they advocated and they pushed for it for years and years. And it wasn't until Mitchell got involved as the head of RAP that real inroads were being made into there. So they were offering the help for the city to distribute funds to these organizations. But at the same time, they wanted to tell the city, it's like, hey, this is how we want it to be distributed. We want to be in control of the money at a community level. We want to be able, like the money that comes into the mission, we want to be able to say how that gets doled out to and to who. And once DCYF is established, that little element of community control about how that money gets distributed within the community, their community, that gets taken away. And it becomes then the decisions by those who are in charge of DCYF. And that right there becomes a really interesting move that would have implications later on.
Yeah, I want to add that I think that when you asked Juan the trajectory of the story of RAP and how we come to this place, Mitchell being that point person, it was 24 and Elisa Miranda appointed him. And the historical piece that Darren just adds is really critical to talk about what leads to the closure, because the city now finds itself in a position, let's fund these organizations, and Mitchell being at the helm, as well as other nonprofit executive directors at that time. And I'm talking the 90s when I get there, and, the money's flowing, but the city's controlling the money. And the intention is, well, let's keep funding these organizations because it's cheaper to hire community workers than to pay the Department of Human Services social workers because they're more money. Even though they don't make that much, but it's more cost. And our approach was, well, the community knows its community. And so it's best if you fund us because we'll get the results we need. And that's transforming people's lives. And that was our motto all the time, helping people, self-determination. And so when we get to the place where what we call, if you worked at RAP, the heydays of RAP, where the money is just coming in from when we start getting money from the California Wellness Foundation, from different foundations. And let me add, RAP was helped the CDC place on the map, look at violence as a health issue. And so now it becomes kind of like, oh, let's address that. So now you have a lot of funding coming in. And RAP happens to be in the lead of doing that intervention work. At the same time, you've got Horizons, you've got CARECEN, Mission Neighborhood Centers. Folks are doing the work and funding is coming in. The creation of the Community Peace Initiative happens. Now you've got city departments involved with community departments, and everybody's working together. But again, like if you listen to the episode, it talks about a deficit that had been carried on for years. And it goes back to when that first act of retaliation, and I'll call it that the city and county take upon RAP because Brave Alberon and Alfredo Bojorquez find, I don't know, 30 something counts of child abuse they file child abuse counts against the juvenile hall, youth guidance center. And because nothing's being done about it, and there's kids reporting, kids are telling them they were going up there and bringing services to the kids, and they're telling them, hey, this is what's happening to me. So Ray's coming to Mitch and he's telling Mitch, this is going on, Mitch. We need to deal with this. We need to deal with this. And they're trying to deal with it formally and filing the complaint with the city. But the city's like, and it was the mayor at that time, Dianne Feinstein. And, they're like, we don't want to hear it. So Ray calls the White House and it's documented. Ray calls the White House and they're like, and you hear it in the episode, and they pay attention. And the White House brings the hammer down on the city and county for the BS that it's not just bullshit, but the stuff they're doing to those kids. And that then becomes the first act of retaliation against RAP, and they stop sending clients, they stop sending kids, and they're forced to close La Casa. So we're carrying now the deficit of that. So the deficit isn't because somebody was putting money in their pocket. And I want to be really clear on that. That's why we felt it was extremely important, not just to exonerate Mitchell, because when you look at the long term of it, you hear it in the voices of the board members. You hear it in the voice of Joanna Uribe, who's in this episode. They have the true accounts. They know. That's why it was important to bring up the thing with the bank, the issue with Willie Brown telling us, will you please carry MTAP, the Muni program. A lot of people don't know that, but we know that. I know that. I was there. And I think what happens is that it wasn't also because, oh, Mitch wasn't perfect. Neither was Socorro, neither was Fred, neither was Ray, anybody that worked there. Neither were any of the other people working in the hood at that time. We all have our contradictions. The thing is having the know-how or the recognition, the humility to acknowledge that we're not perfect. And so Mitch worked from the heart. And I have to share this. When we were closing down and Mitch sent some money from where he was at Annie Casey, because the story's in there, we had to figure out who were we going to pay back first. We needed to pay people for the money we owed. And I get a $6,000 check. The board says, okay, let's decide. We got to pay our vendors. The first thing we say is, let's pay Mr. Pizza Man, because we owe Mr. Pizza Man $6,000 for all the pizza we had ordered for all the community meetings and the kids, all the people we had fed. And so, okay, Socorro, good decision. There I go with Fred to the main offices of Mr. Pizza Man over by Bayshore, behind the McDonald's over there. And I walk in and I forget the man's name, the owner, Brasileño. He knew me because he go, Socorro. And I go, oh, can we get some more credit? And we were always trying to get the hustle. And I said, oh, hey, how are you? And he goes, oh, what are you doing here? And I hand him the check. And I said, look, we want to pay you. RAP's closing down. He goes, oh, no. Wasn't because he was going to lose money on us. We hadn't paid him. He was devastated to find out that a program like this, because he knew his pizza was feeding kids. And he gave me the check back. And if it was really about us, putting money in our pockets, it wasn't about that. Yes, robbing Peter to pay Paul is not a good business practice. Absolutely not. And I'm not saying you can hear it from interviews we have with people that work in the city and county and saying, well, everybody, nonprofits kind of practice that. Well, why wasn't the city getting involved? The city knew that of the work we were doing. And when you look at what happened just recently in the city in San Francisco with the budget cuts, not just budget cuts, with programs being eradicated and just dismissed, like if they never existed. And so history repeats itself. And part of the reason for pulling this episode, it just came timely, Juan, at this time that it just happened. The major budget cuts that so many of you guys in the organizations and the work you're doing now just recently experienced. And I know the feeling in talking with Larissa and talking with, with Gloria, different executive directors. They're saying, how can they, what? And it just makes you think of the cycle of corruption that exists. But as long as you're doing good work and as long as you're saving lives and as long as you're getting you're dealing with the fentanyl crisis, you're dealing with that, they're loving you. But the minute that you're not playing their game, they turn their back on you. And that's why I think part of it is that it was extremely important to exonerate not just Mitch, but the RAP program. Exonerate RAP because it did so much good for so many people. I mean, even to this day, randomly, someone will send me a Facebook message because, yeah, I'm old school. I'm still on Facebook sometimes. Hey, I worked at RAP in 1971 because they feel that that honor. They feel that love. They know what it did for them. Darren has buku recordings of people we recorded, and they'll tell you their experiences from going to their homes in the VGs and the Valencia Gardens and pulling them out of there because they were addicted, because they were on drugs, because their family needed money. It was a lot of love. That's why when Ray Balberon says love and serve the people, it really means that.
There's one element of rap that was really unique, and I think it became something that intimidated a lot of the folks within the city government, county government, and that was the youth development element of rap, where they were able to take, like Socorro said, people who had troubles, youngsters that were either addicted or had been abused, to take them and build them as leaders. These are kids who don't have a formal education, who may even have trouble reading and writing. But the thing was that they were sitting in budget meetings, they'd go to city council, they did the research to understand where the funding came from, and they were truly community leaders. They had a great heart, and they were working on behalf of the community and the youth and in the name of rap. And Mitchell is a perfect example for them to wind up in a situation of a power of being the executive director of this nonprofit. It became very intimidating to a lot of folks because, a lot of executive directors are college educated, or they may even have an advanced degree.
Masters, right.
And they're thinking, how is this guy being successful? How is he getting their funding? And he doesn't even know how to write. But the thing was that it was because of the work that they were doing. And when I talk about how the city and the county, how they evaluate an organization, I believe they kind of developed that practice first on rap, because even though they respected and understood and that the nature of the work that they were doing was great, they failed to provide the type of proper support that rap needed in order for them to play along with the rules that they had, as far as like administering a budget or using it or showing how you can record your accounts and how you can show that the work that you're doing to do all that type of documentation. They provide some of that training, but whenever an organization became like rap became into some dire administrative needs and a deficit, the city didn't reach out and help. I mean, the city, if anything, they should have dug in deeper into RAP's administrative practices and ensure them and provide a safety net for them to say, okay, your administrative practices they need to be brought up to par. And I think that unfortunately, once that they saw how rap played itself into a situation of having real power and leadership, they felt intimidated by that. And just when Socorro, the event that, you know, Ray and had called the White House, it then became like this vindictive move to get back at rap. And there has always been a history of that resistance by the even though we're giving them money, we kind of like, you know, we're going to try to get them to shut down at some point, and them really pushing it, you know, pushing some of those buttons to make that stuff happen instead of like pushing the buttons to help build rap up.
Yeah, and let me add as Darren brings up, instead of helping, when rap closes and the closure is happening and the new iteration of the rap collaboratives, is coming forth. I was still privy to some of that stuff that was going on. I was the last executive director interim. A new iteration of Gaius was going to develop, and they called it Avenidas a la Comunidad because people can do the research, whoever's listening to this commentary, and you can talk to those that were there. And people that know me know I don't need to make stuff up. They were told by DCYF that they would continue to fund the Gaius piece, as long as you didn't call it Gaius, because that would then connect it back to rap. I'm a little bit murky about who was the director at the time, but I think it was the most recent person that just left that position as the director of DCYF. And they were told that. And so that gives you insight. I don't forget Ray calling me, and they were told that. And they couldn't believe it. So they call it Avenidas a la Comunidad. Mission Neighborhood Centers gets the funding for it because we transferred the Gaius program to Mission Neighborhood Centers. And it's important to know that, when we went to meet with Willie Brown, who was the mayor at the time, and we said, look, we want to save the programs. That's the thing the city did do. They said, okay, you negotiate all the contracts. And we did with YGC, with DCYF, and they allowed that to happen. Like they had all the power. But it was the relationship, Juan. If CARECEN didn't want second chance, they could have just said, oh, no, 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 no. Or if Mission Neighborhood Centers didn't want the administrative headache and bureaucracy to take on Gaius, to take on HOMEY, to take on that case management, they could have said no. But because we, like Darren says, we had built that sisterhood and brotherhood already. And so they took the programs. But when you talk about really closing rap, like getting it out of the history books of the city, that move right there with the Avenidas was a huge slap. And so what happens? MNC, Mission Neighborhood Centers, takes Avenidas and they create this great model. But guess what the staff did? They still called it Gaius. They said, yeah, we're Avenidas, but we're Gaius, right? So if you got a Gaius jacket, if you wore an Avenidas jacket, it was like you had earned your Gaius jacket. And so there was these insurgencies of our own way of revolting back against the city. And you hear it in Joanna's statement in the end when she says that hopefully a new version of rap continues. Because that's why when we called it RAMA, and Darren and I come to this, oh man, it's a branch. Like it's continuing, right? It was not like deliberate. It just like RAMA, Rap Audio Media Archive. And then Rama, when you meditate. And then I said, Darren, Rama means branch. So yeah, we made a concentrated effort in this last episode. Again, not to just say, oh, you're excused for your bad behavior. And it wasn't even bad behavior. It was behavior from the heart. I'm sure there's people are going to say, oh, you're making an excuse, but I don't think we were. If you were there, you know how they say, you know, right? Right.
If you didn't know, now you know.
Yeah, you didn't know, now you know. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that really insightful history there. Is this the end of the podcast? Is this the end? What's next for you guys? What's next?
Well, no, it's not the end. And it's actually not, it's not the end of the rap story. When we designed the podcast, the way that we designed it was in 3 apparitions. The first apparition would be telling the story of rap, telling the historical story of rap, to concentrate just on the Mission District, just on rap. The second apparition would be to further the scope out and go outside of the Bay Area and maybe talk about it with other providers who are doing similar type of work. And then the third apparition would be to actually do a regular podcast where we have conversations with national leaders or with local leaders about these different things. And that's what has happened. We developed a live podcast series called Tres Generaciones, Three Voices, where we taken three generations, we identified three generations of community leaders, and we have them exchange information and discuss, topics. So this is a live podcast format. We've already had, if you follow the podcast, we've already had three of them that we've concentrated on. But also, we have hours and hours and hours of interviews that we have not yet released. We can release them as additional as profiles of individuals. We could also introduce them as interviews with roundtables that we've had. And we can also do what you're traditionally hearing, like these splicing together popcorn style, where we're getting all these interviews and we're putting them together to tell a story. We still have the story of the school that we have to talk about. We still have the story of Gaius that we're going to really get deeply into. And also case management. I mean, there's so many topics that we still haven't even touched. So by far, this is not the end of it. This is just the end of the telling the story of the history of that timeline. Now we'll be able to focus more on each individual practices and also how they relate to contemporary to today's issues through the live podcast.
Yeah, I think if you go back to, the title, that it's an archival series. And part of the intention is with our partners is to have each one of the partners carry a story that is related to maybe an executive director, a worker, the organization, so that it sits in their website so that they can use it for historical purposes, do some professional development with their staff. So because when people get locked into doing community work, people come in like, oh my God, I just want to serve my community and I want to work in the community. And then they get in there and it's like, ay, 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 this is like so real, right? It's so heavy. Because one of the things that happens is that it touches to your own stuff. In those therapeutic terms, they call it countertransference. You start feeling like what you went through, like, oh, I went through that. Oh, I experienced that. And sometimes it becomes heavy. And with hearing these stories, especially of some of the individual workers, how they were able to overcome some of their own challenges and persevere and be resilient is the stories Darren's talking about, the hours of individual interviews we have. It can serve as motivation. It can serve as inspiration. And so hopefully people carry those individual interviews on their websites so that people can hear it. They can hear that story. Doctora Concha Saucedo Concepcion was a board president at RAP and one of the co-founders of Instituto Familiar. When we were working with her much more closer in the beginning of this, she said one of the things she found is that there's an ahistorical attitude. People, younger generations of folks coming in to do community work, they don't have a background. They don't have a history of what they're coming into or why. Who's the legs, the feet they stand upon, with the people that have done the work. Is that important? Yes, it's super duper important for people to understand it, people to hear it, to feel it, if people are alive, to meet those folks. And so that's part of our goal, is to have that happen. And no, the podcast, it's got so much more potential, so many more roads that I think we need to travel on. And we've gotten some, interest from folks. We've done some classroom work. We're currently working with the SALT, with the Vasa community, the Pacific Islander community, and helping them document some of the work that they've been doing. And, RAP had a serious relationship with the Samoan and the Pacific Islander community. So, we have some commitments to some work where we want to continue to do it and utilize the podcast as a format for people to speak. of what they're feeling and what they're thinking, and especially about what they're doing.
I'm sure that we could talk a lot about the subject matter, but fortunately, I think we've run out of time. I really want to thank you, Socorro and Darren, for allowing me to host this commentary session with questions. And I want to thank you for allowing me to go through this experience with you. It's been a pleasure for me and my team to put the podcast out there for the people to listen to, as well as the history, to learn about the history of the RAP program and the history of the mission. I want to thank the listeners for tuning in. Please share this podcast on all your social media. And we look forward to listening to future podcasts by Socorro Gamboa and Darren De Leon. And we hope you can join us. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you, Juan.
Peace.
Thank you.
And remember, to listen is to heal.
All power to the people.
Right on, Juan. This concludes this episode. Thank you for listening to this extra. We also thank our sister organizations for their sponsorship and support. CARECEN SF, Instituto Familiar de la Raza, Horizons Unlimited, SALT, Vasa Community, United Players, and Brava Women for the Arts. And a special thanks to all of our dedicated community listeners and individual donors for their ongoing support. Our theme song was written and performed by Orlando Toriente and Lolo. This episode was produced and edited by Darren J. De Leon and Socorro Gamboa for the Five Sisters Audio Garden. Please consider donating to RAMA Blueprints at the CARECENSF.org website or the link in the description. Please subscribe to our podcast and share it with 2 people. You can hear archive episodes of RAMA Blueprints wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Thank you for listening. And remember, to listen is to heal. All power to the people.